Hello and welcome to today's My Aim's Recruitment Show, where we are going to be talking about how you can grow a contract recruitment desk and create that recurring revenue stream and boost the value of your business. Now, to do that, I have my fabulous co-host, Mr. Michael Ames. How are you doing today, big guy?
I think considerably better than you, because it's your birthday today, isn't it? And you're poorly.
It is my birthday, and I am poorly. I'm obviously 23.
Yeah, obviously. So, but I'm so glad you could make it. Pete and Lily had to stand in, and you know how we don't like that. He goes and changes the logo to the Pete Ames Show and everything.
No, I don't like it at all. If you see me muting it, then mind your business. I'm doing it for your guys' benefit here. But yes, I am poorly, but I'm soldiering through. But today, Mike, we're talking about contracts. Do you want to, just before we bring our guests on, do you want to talk about why this is what we're talking about today?
Yes, I get a lot of people asking me about setting a contract desk up, and both of my recruitment companies were predominantly contract, so it's something that I know quite a bit about, obviously, and something that I really like. I like contract a lot, and there are some significant upsides having that recurring revenue. I think it's quite useful, of course. Being able to reuse your candidates, which is kind of a big thing that people don't think about, which has some effects on your profitability, plus a whole bunch of other things that you can do with contract that you can't do with perm. But there are some downsides and there are some risks as well. And I would argue that it's more difficult in some areas. So we're going to explore all of these today with our guests. And we're going to try and give you some clarity and some specific things that you can do as well if you want to set up a contract desk. So why don't we start by bringing on our first guest, Kirsty? So I'd like to welcome Tom Giles, who's the founder and MD of TCM Partners. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you very much, Mike. Nice to see everybody. Happy birthday, Kirsty.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you very much.
Would you just like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, Tom, just to kind of position you a little bit for them?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I started recruitment in 2010 and have always done the contract desk. So that's quite a long time, 14 years. And yeah, always done contract mainly, and we'll get onto it in a little bit in terms of the transition that you can have onto permanent, but it's always been focused on building transformation teams and program resources, that kind of world, which tends to lend itself quite well to interim contractors, highly skilled contractors as well.
And your firm now, TCM Partners, is again predominantly focused on contract, isn't it? So it's the world that you live in.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we do a lot.
One of the reasons I wanted Tom to come on the show is we could have got someone from a much bigger organisation. I mean, Tom's more than a solopreneur, but he's not like got 20 people. But I think that misses the rawness of starting up. It's because they're so far away from it, like me, really, such a long time ago. I wanted somebody that was closer, if you like, to the process that you would be going through if you set up your own business, which is why we brought Tom on. So thanks for coming on the show, Tom.
Yeah. Right, Tom, I'm going to get started with the first one, and this is more of a sort of setting the scene question. And I want to know, how does contract differ to perm? What are the big differences between the two, and how does that affect how you organize your team?
So I think the main differences for me, I think, are that the contract recruitment, there's loads of different kind of benefits to it. You can kind of reuse your candidates, and I think the candidate relationships that you have are kind of forever. So I think that's kind of a really good point. You never really stop engaging with a certain candidate, certainly when they're placed. When they're no longer placed and they finish that piece of work, you still want to continue engaging with them. I think the other element for me, which is always been quite a big thing, is having the candidate on a permanent search is often the key. And I think on contract, I find that it's not about having the candidate, because I think there isn't the candidate on contract. I think it's about the relationship that you have with the client and the value that you can give that client throughout the course of them needing specialist contractors. Yeah, so those are a couple of things. I think obviously very quickly, just in terms of from a business benefit, I think obviously the value of that kind of consistent revenue is that's a kind of real positive. It's not kind of spiking like you might get on your P&L in a more a perm heavy business. You get a bit more consistency. I also think as well from a managing consultants, I think they get quite a lot of value from contract because again, you don't get that spikes in kind of huge commission checks and then absolutely nothing for months. You kind of get that kind of consistency. So there's that kind of real drive that people get from contract.
Can I pick up on a couple of points that you said there? Because I rather boringly agree with that. We're looking for places that Tom and I disagree, so we can get a little bit of a discussion going. But in this case, sadly, I can't. But I would say this: we always said you should treat your contractors like clients. Now that might be a throwaway line, but it isn't, because with a client, a good client, you build a relationship with them. It's ongoing. You treat them properly. Whereas with a permanent candidate, kind of like a client in the sense of a customer, you're doing something for them. But once that transaction is done, chances are you'll never see them again. With contract, it isn't like that. And Tom made that point. It's very important that you build relationships with contractors and treat them like clients. They were the single biggest source of new clients for us. That I cannot stress that enough. We would get telephone calls from contractors who weren't working for us. They were working for another agency and a different client. And the client had said, "Oh, do you know anybody that's got any of these?" And they would say, "Yeah, Mike Ames, I can introduce you if you like." And that happened on several of our biggest clients. Severn Trent Water, where we had 70 to 80 contractors, that came from that. RS Components, same thing. A lot of people on site came from a contractor that wasn't working for us. So I think you've got to see your contractor pool as different. The other point that you made there, Tom, which I think is really important, this point around relationships, which is something very close to our heart, of course. We're relationship salespeople. But you can get to the stage with contract, because they're not taking somebody forever. You can just get to the stage of a relationship with a client where they say, "Oh, you couldn't send me another Fred Blogs, could you?" And you say, "I've got one." "Oh, yeah. Can you start him on Monday?" So sometimes no interview or a very loose interview, which you'd never get with perm for various reasons. So that relationship is massively powerful and can significantly increase your profits if you do that. So very good points there, Tom.
Okay, fantastic. So just to let everybody, as we go through, do feel free to ask some questions. We've got some come through. The first one was, I'm wearing the jazzy shirt today. Mike's order is my birthday, Martin, which is why I'm taking the focus. Somebody's asked if we can get a recording. Yes, you will. If you're registered, you'll get emailed it, and it's also available on our YouTube channel, and I can send you the link after it's finished. So it is available for rewatching. But there is another question, but it's going to be brought up later. But what I want to talk about first, Tom, really is those initial steps. When you sit down and you think, right, I want a contract desk, to where you are now, where you've got a functioning one running, what kind of steps is it that you need to take in order for that to happen?
So, great point, and I think that's kind of I think the first steps that I would take in terms of starting a contract business, because I would expect probably a lot of the listeners might have an existing perm desk and existing client relationships of some sort. I would have thought some sort of revenue stream or terms of business in place. For me, the first conversations is speaking to an existing client base or candidate base to effectively try and figure out where contracts needs are. My thing is always, every hiring manager will hire perm at some point. I think if you have a team, you will be conscious of, I need to either build this team or I need to replace somebody or whatever it may be. But only a very small number of managers hire interim, I find, single digit percentages or etc. And I think actually the key in contract recruitment is figuring out who those are, and that's why a lot of really, really good contract recruiters will be obsessed with leads and information and who's hiring out there. Being pretty relentless on the phone, engaging with candidates, trying to pick up that market information, which is really key. And again, very, very similar to permanent. I think it's probably just a little bit more targeted when it comes to contract, I think.
Can I just pick up on that point as we go through, rather than forget it at the end, because this is really important. One of the things you can do with contract, which it's kind of harder to do with perm, is that if you've got someone who's an experienced contractor, they've been from one assignment to the next, clearly everywhere that they've worked as a contractor takes contractors. And they're usually very open, if you've got a good relationship with them, to tell you who they worked for. So I see you worked at ABC Limited and, 2020. Yeah. Who did you work for there? Was that contract? Yeah. Who did you work for there? I worked for so-and-so and so-and-so. So we used to employ someone before the days of LinkedIn, and his job was to do that. His job was to go through and figure out from the CVs where contractors were used, and preferably the name of the person that we should target to get in there. So, which again, you can't do with Perm. So I think that's a really good thing to do, actually.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that living and breathing that information and those CVs and CV stripping, as we used to call it. But using that information, that's your starting point. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Okay, what comes next then, Tom?
So I suppose once you've effectively, I think once you've identified let's say a group of hiring managers that hire contracts or kind of continuously hire contracts, I think for me the next thing about that is trying to get people on the phone, which again I think is interesting in terms of like the modern market. And I think all recruiters are probably struggling to get people on the phone a little bit these days. But again, I think it's super important because, again, I think going back to my original point in terms of the differences between contract and permanent, I think that in order to hire and place contractors, I think you've got to demonstrate value over and above saying, I have X candidate. I think it is about service delivery. So we spend so much money, so much effort on working with businesses and their programs and what they're trying to deliver and what our contractors are trying to deliver and supporting them, whether that might be family issues or remote working and they can't get on, or they need to get a laptop or whatever it may be. It might be a real problem that they've got and trying to help them to kind of resolve that and communicate that properly. So I think it's trying to identify and kind of share some of that extra value, some of that USP.
I think that is important. I think, again, I go back to this point I made earlier. Your contractors are clients now, they're customers, right? And so you've got a whole bunch of value to show to your existing clients, which you would do in Perm anyway, of course, with the content that you produce or how you support them, you go and see them, etc., etc. You have to do the same with contract. We used to spend per head more on entertaining contractors than we did clients. So if taking them out for drinks and curries and God knows what else, we would spend more per head on them than we would for our clients. And it is about showing an interest and showing value for sure. Can I ask another question around this then? Because I think this point of setting up, for a lot of people, it seems quite daunting. So if we've there's a question come up from Martin, if you could bring that up actually. And then Tom has got a similar question underneath, right? So this is an important question, isn't it, Tom? It's okay.
So I'm just going to read it out for those on the podcast, Mike. If you work in a niche that doesn't have much of a contractor market, what's the answer? Diversifying to one that does?
Yeah, this is an important question because we get it a lot. We help people set up desks sometimes, and it's like, well, yeah, there is no contract in your space, so you can't do that. So you have that question: should I go to a new market? Probably one which is connected to the one that you're already in. But I don't know about you, Tom. Your background is IT, I think, isn't it, Tom?
Tech transformation, effectively. So big change programs, that type of stuff.
So is mine. Absolutely. But you can normally look at any professional service will have some kind of interim and contract. You can consider the same thing. Ostensibly, they're slightly different, but they're not that far adrift. Whereas you want to avoid the temp market, which is where people are negotiating for the last penny, literally. It's like, that's not a place to be, really. This is a little different. So any professional service, or sometimes in your existing sector, but further up the chain. So you're going further up into management, senior management, or consultants that people bring in sometimes, or specialists that people will bring in. So I know it's not much of an answer really, and I wish I'd got more time, but if you look, you will find something really, Martin.
Well, I agree with that actually, and I suppose I don't think I've ever come across a market that doesn't have contractors of some sort. Naturally there will be, even if it's 99% Perm and there's 1% Perm. And I think for me, what Perm does is it solves a problem for a client. It doesn't fill a seat, and Perm fills a seat. Contract solves a problem. So that might be a brand new system that they're putting in, a new process that they're looking to do. It might be an injection of knowledge and experience across a brand new product they've never touched on. So for me, it's not necessarily about the core skill set like it might be with Perm. I think it's about trying to find clients that are looking to solve a problem. And I think that's the difference, and that's where permanent would be used. Companies very, very rarely use use contract because they can't get a skill set. Yeah. They use contract to solve a problem that they're going through, and I think that that's the key. So ABC Limited currently have 12 procurement managers. They don't need contract, but 123 Limited down the road, they're putting in a brand new procurement system, so therefore they have to have contractors because actually they've got to increase their knowledge and their skill set and land this platform.
That's a good point. I think any time you see a change in a business, there's almost certainly a chance that they'll be using contracts of some sort, either in the new world, and it doesn't have to be tech necessarily, it can be a change in system or process or whatever, but in the new world, so they want to bring in specialists with that knowledge, or sometimes in the old world, where you're essentially, people don't want to be associated with the old world, but for a time, the new and the old world must run together in parallel for a while. Well, none of the permanent staff want to get stuck with that old tech or that old way of doing things, right? So they outsource that very often. I'll tell you something else about this as well, and we were discussing this a little bit off air, is Tom and I have got a slightly different view on niche, actually, which would be interesting for us to talk about. Tom, can you share your views on niche and contract?
So I think niche is less important on contract. Again, I think going back to my previous point, I think it's more about the service that you provide and what you can kind of offer, because my view is that the contractors are easier to find than the permies are. However, saying that, I mean, what you kind of can't do is just go, I'm everything for everybody. Of course, you've got to have some sort of differentiator. But my view is, in terms of from a niche, what you're effectively doing is you're speaking to lots of candidates in order to figure out what the client problem is, and then you're kind of pitching that. That's kind of the way that I've always kind of run it.
Well, again, rather boringly, I don't disagree with that, but I'd like to put a different angle on it, or a different scope on it, because with Perm, what you sell with Perm is a service. So you say to somebody, look, if you give me a vacancy in this space, whatever your space is, I'll go and I'll find you some permanent candidates, and I'll make sure they're the right fit and yada, 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 right? That's what you do. You give me something, I'll go and get it. What we used to do with contract in both my companies was basically build up what was called a squad. So not everybody did this. So some of our recruiters were reactive in that way. Give us this vacancy in this space, go and find somebody. But the ones that made the most money were the ones that built a squad, or a niche, if you want to call it that way, of contractors that had similar skill sets. And then what we did was we sold access to the squad. So I'm going to say that again, because that's really important. So we weren't going, hey, we're great at recruitment, give us a chance, we'll do these great things for you. No. We've got this squad of contractors that we have accredited, because you can do that with contractors. You can take references out on them. They don't mind. You can talk to them. You can talk to places they've worked. It's not like Perm at all. You can actually check them out, and you can make certain that they're pretty good at what they do. Well, we've done all that work. We know they're pretty good. Some of these people have worked for us 2 or 3 times before, and they're accredited. So you get access to this group. Now, if you want to go out to your normal agencies first, it's absolutely fine. If you get stuck, come to us, and you can have one of our accredited contractors. It was a very, very cool way to sell contract services without, you're almost selling yourself as a consultancy. It's like, well, we've already got a list of, no, that's not us. No. See us more as a consultancy.
Yeah.
See us more as a KPMG.
I do have to interrupt now, because there is one question that I want to, that leads on really nicely from what you were saying, which is, how are you supposed to find those high quality contractors? How you've both said, the contractors are really key here. So Tom, where are you looking to find and engage with these kind of high quality contractors?
I would probably say the best contractors will always be referral based. I find, I mean, you've got your recruiters, and you've got messages and that kind of stuff, but I think that the best contractors will always come through referrals. Exactly as Mike said, whether it be references, who's the best person you've worked with? We're looking for somebody in this space that can do X, Y, Z. Who's the best person you've worked with in that space? And I often find as well, obviously, very rare will a company just hire one contractor. They'll normally hire a squad, a team, exactly as Mike alluded to. So yeah, I think being on the phone and referrals come really good. Dead quick point. The only other part that I would say, just following on from Mike's point, is I think Mike's maybe a little bit more old school than I am, maybe in terms of like the modern world at the moment. I think that kind of niche element is really key to bear in mind, that getting on PSLs is very, very difficult nowadays. And I think, it's because they're led by talent teams. And I find actually once you have those terms with a client, you've got to try and explore that. I think it's a little bit more difficult nowadays to kind of offer a service and everyone just kind of, you just kind of start placing odd contractors here and there and everywhere. I think once you're in with a client, it's a very, very difficult sales process to kind of get through that. That was just the point that I mentioned. I think probably a lot of recruiters will bear that in mind.
The rule that we had was everyone had, as you say, to be able to react to the clients that they have. If you don't support the clients, you're going to lose them. But I also encourage everybody to have at least one niche. And about a third of our salesmen consultants had a niche. And the ones that did made the most money because they were selling access to that squad, as well as, we've got this big database because there was no LinkedIn in those days. But fair point, well made.
Okay. We do have an episode on niche that I'll put in the comments, or if you're watching on YouTube, I'll put in the little tag above. But what I want to do now, Mike, is I want to move on to a topic which I believe we have another guest that can help us with. Do you want to introduce our next
that? Because you can see him in the waiting room, in the green room. So, Okay, so so ask us the question, Kirsty, and then I'll bring in Rich.
Okay, so the question is, how can we manage risks effectively? Because everybody knows that there are different risks with contracting than there is.
There are compliance. Finance is a very big risk. So I'd like to bring in now our next guest, Rich Berrisford, BDM for Giant Finance Plus, who also happen to be our sponsors, but he's here not as a sponsor today. He's here to add value around this incredibly important subject, because there are a lot more risks associated with contract than there are with perm. So welcome, Rich. Would you like to say a few words about yourself before we kick off?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Hi, Kirsty. Hi, Tom. Thanks for the invite. I'm Rich Berrisford. Been with Giant Finance for around about 5 years now. We are a recruitment-specific invoice funding provider, as well as sort of full back office, payroll, all the nuts and bolts, all the bells and whistles that a recruitment business would need to move into the contract or temp sector, and to have that support and build that desk out and grow their business.
Fantastic. Okay, so if I can put this question to you, Rich, then, there are a lot of risks. There's financial risk, compliance risks, market fluctuations, all these kind of things. How do you manage them from a contracting perspective?
Yeah, and there is a lot to manage, Kirsty. You're right. There's a lot of plates to spin. Set aside the fact that you're also, running your own business and everything that goes along with that. But then to go and sort of branch out into contract recruitment, you may be coming from the perm focused business. And as Tom and Mike have alluded to, it's very different when you move into the contract space. And focusing on the kind of the logistics and the kind of the actual processing side of things, there is a huge difference there. You've got the financial risk first and foremost.
I wanted to lead on that one, Rich, because that's the big difference, really. I know there are other things as well, but if you get that wrong, then you can get yourself in all sorts of mischief, can't you?
Yeah, it was cash flow, isn't it? At the end of the day, Mike, you've got to make sure business lives and dies on its cash flow, and make sure you've got that right. So going in with a clear idea of what you need to achieve is important. Doing your research and leaning on experts. You're sort of an expert in your field in the recruitment side. You're not necessarily an expert in the finance and payroll and compliance space. So
it's right to say, though, what we're talking about here. I just want to get to the numbers, because with perm, and I know you can get finance on perm deals as well. I know that, but with perm, you do a deal, you put the invoice in, and you think, well, in 3 months' time or 2 months' time or whatever the deal is you've negotiated, the money will come in, right? And that's fine. You've not paid out any money at all to anybody. Okay, you're running your business, right? But you've not paid any money out against that invoice. With contract, you've paid money out to a contractor probably within 7 days, less than that sometimes. They want to, people want to be paid much quicker than that these, don't they? But it could be 40 or even 50, 60, 70 days before you get your money. That's what we're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that cash flow gap, as I call it, where your clients aren't going to pay you for, like you say, 40 days if you're lucky, 60, 70 days, even longer. And you're paying on a weekly basis. You're paying your contractors out weekly. So being able to manage that and have the cash flow. Now, if you're lucky, and you're fortunate as a business, you can self-fund that. And if you have a perm desk that's going well and successful, and you've got that cash in the business, well done you. Fantastic. You can then utilize that. However, even if you can do that, do you want to have that cash tied up? So yeah, there's a huge amount of risk, and knowing how to go to market and make sure you bridge that cash flow gap without exposing yourself to risk of bad debt is crucial.
I think on
I want
that
to bring
point,
Tom
Rich,
in.
as well.
Yeah, could I bring you in on this now, Tom?
Of course, absolutely. I was just going to say, actually, interestingly, that I think the financial risk and the cash flow is absolutely key. But I also think, as well, as a recruitment owner, it's the credit control element. I think that's a real key part of it, and that the energy and effort that it takes to actually chase and make sure payments are regular and on time and within the boundaries of the terms, and as you said, so it doesn't get to that bad debt point. I think the support that I have from a third party is great from that perspective, because otherwise I'd be spending 3 hours a day chasing, making sure invoices are paid, and I just don't have that time.
There's a heads up on this, guys, and I'm sure both would agree with this. Just because it says you've got payment terms in your contract doesn't necessarily mean to say that that's when they'll pay the money.
No.
Right? It's the same in Perm, I know, but in Perm you can kind of live with it a bit. But we had one client once, a well-known tractor manufacturer, Massey Ferguson actually, who just sent us an email that said we were on 90 days, we're pushing it to 220 days because our cash flow isn't so good at the moment. What now? So no, I don't think so. And we had to go in, and I had to threaten in the end to pull all the contractors out if they didn't swap it back to 90, which originally it had been something like 60 days. So I think this is really important, and I would stress, get your finance in place, get your structure sorted. Increasingly, and I'll ask this question of you in a second, Rich, but you can get a line of credit in place without having to use it. So what it's difficult to do is realize you're going to run out of money at the end of the month and then try and put your credit line in. This is not good, really. So Rich, can you just talk us through actually how credit lines work?
Yeah, so if effectively you need access to funds to fund that payroll every week. So you need to make sure you've got sufficient credit to be able to make those commitments ahead of your client paying your invoices. So if you're invoicing out on a weekly basis based on timesheets that are being submitted by contractors or from clients, you need to fund against the invoice generated on the back of that timesheet effectively. And there's many ways to do that. That there are many ways of sourcing that cash and funding it, but effectively you need enough cash available to you, not necessarily in your bank account, because that's not necessarily working well for your business if it's sat there. But you need available funds to fall back on to make sure you can pay your contractors, because your business is going to live and die by that. If you're not able to pay your contractors in any given week, you're in trouble. You're in trouble as a business. Oh, yeah. Reputationally, financially, you've got all sorts of risk there. So that's
what you've got to realize as well is one decision, like a client says, I need 10 contractors, and you think, bloody brilliant, right? You have to think about the cash flow before you say yes, because it's not just about, like with Perm, can I find 10 people to put in that client? Yeah, I can do that. Awesome. It's, can I do that, and can I afford it? Because if you can't afford it, it can actually bankrupt you. It can close your business down. And we've had a couple of occasions in the past. Once I was owed £300,000, which doesn't seem like a lot of money in today's contract world, but it was a lot of money then. And we had a word to say they were going to go bankrupt. And if they'd have gone bankrupt, so would we, because we didn't insure the debt in those days. So cash flow awareness and management is absolutely crucial. So can I ask you about insurances, Rich? So we didn't have our debt insured. Had it gone, well, there you go. We'd have gone with it. Is it possible to get insurance on debt these days?
Yeah, it's possible, and it's advisable. It's a must, really. I'd say even if you're not utilizing credit and some sort of finance facility, try and insure that debt, because that's going to, like you say, that could save your business if there's any issues. But in certain sectors, it's more prevalent. Construction, for example, we see huge contractors go pop with alarming regularity these days. So having insurance on those debtors is going to save your business. And the two things that go along with finance, might, like you're correct, it's it's insurance and credit control, and keeping on top of those two things, because they all go hand in hand, and you need to have all of those in place to be able to successfully manage your clients and make sure you can make the commitments of paying contractors and sort of growing your desk.
And Rich, from an insurance perspective, really quickly, it's about 80% or something like that, isn't it, that you get insured normally? It's only a percentage. You still have a liability, don't you?
Yeah, so I mean, ours is 90% with a sort of 10% excess, effectively. But yeah, it's kind of like on your car insurance. You know, the generally there'll be an excess there. So as long as you've got sufficient cover on those clients, you've got that to fall back on. And there's the keeping on top of the credit control and having expertise in place, whether it's internally or externally through a funding company like us, then that's going to allow you to keep on top of your credit control and focus on what you do best. Because Tom, you were talking earlier about how to go into the contract market and set up and speaking to perm clients and researching your market. At the same time, you sort of need to be then sourcing finance and insurance and doing it ahead of time, because you don't want to be in a position like Mike said, where someone phones you up and says, yeah, brilliant, 10 contractors next month, please. Fantastic. That's going to be huge for the business, but you've got to make sure you can deliver on that and have the funding in place, because it can take a little bit of time depending on circumstances. You can put it in place quickly, but it's always advisable to sort of do that ahead of time and get your ducks in a row.
I think that's incredibly important, particularly if you're bringing in consultants. So if it's your own business and you're making the decisions, that's fine. But you can't just have a consultant go and accept a big deal and then place it all and say, I've done all of that. It's like, well, you might have done, mate, but we can't finance all of that. You have to be well in touch with what your team are doing and well in touch with your bank balance and your cash flow. I think that's, we can move on from this now, but I think that's a really important key point to it.
Okay, all right. Now, before we move on, Mike, I do believe it's that time of the show where we have a message from our sponsors.
Yeah, but it was kind of weird this time because our sponsor is sitting on the show. It's Giant, right? But he's here not to promote his business, which he hasn't done. He's here to add value in the space. But I think it's becoming very, very clear indeed that you need to get your finance covered. It is incredibly important. I think it's important with Perm, obviously. The number one reason that businesses fail in this country, small businesses, is cash flow. So I think to have a partner who can not only provide contract resource, but also contract financing, but also financing on Perm invoices, and to provide insurance and that back office support is crucial. And that's exactly what Giant Finance do, which is why we are proud to be partnered by them and have them as our sponsor on this show. So if you'd like to talk to Rich about anything that we've discussed today, you can contact him on LinkedIn, or there'll also be a link on this post that you can pick up with him. So finance is as important as sales or anything else when it comes to contract.
Fantastic. Hopefully that didn't make you blush too much, Rich. Okay, so what I want to do for the last kind of questions, and if you guys do have any questions for Rich or for Tom or for Mike, he's there too, then please put them in the chat. But what I want to talk about is challenges and kind of bear traps that people fall into. Anybody who sees anybody in kind of recruitment will see people doing the same things and making a mistake, and you think, oh, I wouldn't do that. So Tom, I want to come to you first. Is there a common challenge that you think you see people doing when they start or are involved in contract recruitment?
I think I suppose one of the major things for us is IR35. I think that's quite a big thing. I know it's been done to death, but I think there's obviously quite a big risk associated for recruiters. The mutuality of obligation kind of is very, very clear to say that the fee payer, can be liable for any taxes that should have been charged at the time. And we won't go into it in too much detail, but we've had to walk away or certainly re-advise the client to kind of rethink things if they're effectively not educated enough on IR35 and the risks associated with that. So effectively, if for example a permie left and you go, oh, do you know what, I can't find anybody, I'll just put a contractor in that space and pay them to their limited company. That's effectively against IR35 rules because that's part of their structure. So that's quite a big risk. Maybe another show to kind of to unpick that, to kind of go in. But again, as a recruiter, you've got to be really careful. And there's a number of different tools. I'm sure Rich can help with this as well. But just around just making sure that things are assessed properly, and actually you're also giving good advice to the client. And again, if it did come down to a court case of any sort, and the client demonstrated you've given them bad advice, that falls onto the recruiter, which is a huge risk and a huge liability to kind of cover.
I mean, just before I bring Richard on this, because I'm sure he's got something to say, would your default be this is inside IR35? Is that your default?
Yeah, but the problem is, and it's a good point. So effectively, if you were to say to the client, "Oh, this is inside IR35," but then as a recruiter were to pay that contractor to their limited company, you're effectively falling foul of IR35 regulations. If the contract is inside IR35, you have to take their tax and NI off them and pay them to their personal.
As if they were employed like a permanent member.
As if they were employed. Exactly right. As if they are employed by. Normally, you'd have an umbrella company that would sit in between the contractor. You'd have an umbrella company and then the recruiter. So you'd pay the umbrella company. They would take the tax and NI off. But as I said, if you skip that, and obviously what can happen sometimes is the availability of inside I-35 contractors. It's not quite as lucrative for contractors. So therefore, you'd get a really good contractor and a mate who would say, "I'm not working inside." And if you were to place them in the client in an inside I-35 role, but pay them to limited company account, effectively you're breaking the law.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Rich, have you got anything else you'd like to add around this subject?
I think it all comes down to something I said earlier. Sort of try and rely on people who know what they're talking about. Because this is big. There's a lot of compliance things that you're going to need to be aware of. There's some big changes potentially imminent around the distinguishing between employees and workers, and what Labour have got a whole plan there. So there's potential changes on the road ahead as well. So utilize kind of legal experts, and there's companies out there that can assist with this to make sure you are on safe ground legally, because it's a different world to perm. There are employment legislations to be aware of, and IR35, as Tom said. So sort of do your research, speak to people who know what they're talking about.
And I would just say dead quick, I've literally covered 1 point of, I think, 7 on IR35. So MMO, which is mutuality of obligation, that's just 1 point. So there's 7 that you've got to be aware of. So I would definitely say do your research if you are getting into the world of inside, outside IR35, and just make sure that you're kind of ticking every box and have got some really good legal advice.
Fantastic.
Yeah, very sound, because it can cost you a lot of money if you get that wrong.
Nobody wants that. And Rich, what would you say that your kind of biggest common challenge that people who you work with come up against, or the mistake that people make continually over and over again? What would you say is your?
I think what I see a lot of in my sort of role as BDM is people sort of running before they can walk, and trying to sort of go out and set up their business within a matter of weeks, win clients, and then realize after a few weeks that they're not prepared. They don't have the infrastructure in place, because that's what it's all about. We've talked mostly around contract recruitment today, but Mike, you've alluded, there's also temp out there, which is a different beast altogether, and there's different challenges there. But make sure you've got your ducks in a row, because the last thing you want to do is get to the point where you've signed terms with a client, and again, that's a whole other podcast as well, talking about watertight terms and making sure you've got those agreements in place, because that's going to be important. But the last thing you want to do is get to the point where you've got that client on the hook, and you're sort of trying to source roles, but at the same time you can't fund it, you can't insure that client. Do some credit checking in advance, make sure that you are looking at that client. Even if you're not funding it, even if it's just a perm placement, going back to the perm side, it's worth credit checking these clients, because if they're not going to pay you, if there's issues around their kind of liquidity, you're not going to make any money on the back of it. So what's the point in spending your time working on that role? Sales not complete until you've got the cash in the bank. So credit checking and getting your ducks in a row in advance is really important. And it's a process as well. It's a process. It's a learned thing. I think a lot of people watching this are going to be fantastic salespeople. They're recruiters. They do it day in, day out. But having processes in place and making sure you're adhering to them is really important when you're sort of trying to go down a different avenue and set up things on contract desks.
It's a lot more process driven than perm, isn't it? We all talk about processes in our companies and we know the value of them, but it's sort of optional in perm, really, in a weird way, but in contract, absolutely not. Have your processes, make sure that people are sticking to them, and make sure that everything's as it needs to be. Because if you don't do that, sooner or later, you will catch a cold.
Okay. All right, we're coming towards the end of the show now. So in a second, I'm going to come to Tom and Rich and ask for their top tip about getting started with a contract desk. But before then, Mike, we are really excited about our next show, aren't we?
Well, we are, yes, because we're going to be discussing the impact of AI on recruitment. We've got Max Armbruster who's coming on the show. I came by Max because I attended an American series of seminars on AI, and he was one of the people on there. And he'd got this AI called Sam, and there was a kind of example of Sam interviewing a candidate and this, that, and the other. And of course, you think, well, it could be staged or something, but in this case, it wasn't. And I approached him and said, would you like to come on the show? And he said, yeah, would you like Sam to ring you up on the show and interview you for a fictitious job? Would I ever? I'm telling you that the world of AI is probably not what you think it is. It almost certainly isn't what you think it is. There's some very, very big pluses to it, but there are some big dark areas where we're not sure what's going to happen that could turn out badly for us. So what we want to do on this show is really discuss the full impact of AI on our industry and how that's going to work, and give an indication of what one of these robots looks like when they ring you up and interview you for a job. So we're very excited about that.
We are indeed. That is in 2 weeks on the 22nd. Right, okay, we've come to that time in the show, guys, where I'm coming to you for your top tips. So the idea of this is, if you're new to the show, we go to our guests and ask them, what's the smallest, what's the most tangible, easy to implement thing that somebody could do? So I'm going to start with you, Tom. Somebody's thinking, I want to be like you, Tom. I want to be like you. I want to have a contract desk. What's the kind of first thing that you would suggest that they do?
Good question. So I think two things I'd probably say would be, first, go and have a chat with your existing clients. Go and have those conversations. We've got a capability to deliver contractors, and a lot of your competitors are doing this. And I think the questions that you probably got to try and ask is around what problem can you solve, not what people do you need. I think that's the key for me. Is trying to figure out what the challenge is, and then you can kind of use contract to solve that problem. So I think alter your questions a little bit and figure out where that need is. And I think the other thing for me is any recruiters is, you've got to change your approach when you're doing contract. Contract is about volume of calls. You have to speak to as many people as you can. You have to ask as many questions as you possibly can. You have to try and get as much information as you can. A lot of it will be, you scratch my back, I scratch your back. But then sometimes with the perm stuff, it can be quite very, very highly quality driven. You're only speaking to the very, very best, and you're only introducing the very, very best. Contract is a volume game. You've got to get, your lists in terms of who hires contractors very, very quickly, and then you can start to target those. That's probably my quick top tips.
Amazing. Thank you very much for those. Very appreciated. Rich, what about you? What would somebody's thinking, I want to get started with contract, kind of what do I need to do first from an in-place point of view?
Yeah, so I think I would say make sure you've got kind of watertight contractual terms in place with your clients. Likewise on the perm side, make sure that you've got agreed payment terms that work for you, and that your clients are adhering to them where possible. Have a good credit control process in place, because that's, again, something that you may not have as a perm recruiter. It's a little bit different in terms of the regularity of those payments coming in. So having that good process on the credit control side is going to be vital to whether it's a success or not. And one final thing as well, I would say, try and stick to your area of expertise where possible. What's made you successful on the perm side is, hopefully going to make you successful on the contract side as well. That sort of expertise you've developed, and those sort of same clients are potentially going to be the ones that can allow you to grow.
I love that. Thank you very much. Now, Mike, they've both taken 2 points, but I'm going to let you see if you can just keep it to 1. Can you? Or are you going to have 2 as well?
I can. Well, I'm first of all going to say what they said, because that's really good advice, right? And I do want people to think of contractors as clients, and I'll keep saying that, but it's kind of an easy thing to understand, but you have to start to think of them just like customers, and exactly the same, build relationships with them. and actually see how that develops forward. But if you're talking about one thing you can do right now, I'm kind of building on something that Tom said, really. I think you have to understand the area that you're going to service, and is there enough opportunity in there for you? And it starts with talking to your clients. And then the second thing is to start to talk to contractors. Just ring them up and tell them what you're doing and explain how it's going to work and see what they say, and begin to build, whether it's a formal squad or just an informal squad, a gathering of types of people that you would use. It doesn't matter. Start and speak to them, because you can learn so much from them in all sorts of ways. It's invaluable, really.
Okay. Right, guys. Well, we have come to the end of the show. So first of all, I want to say thank you to everybody who has been watching and mostly complimenting my shirt. I very much appreciate that. I want to say a huge thank you to our guests. There's been a lot of value from Tom and Rich today, so I really want to say thank you very much. And of course, I want to say thank you very much to Mike for just being magnificent, really.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to our guests, just to echo that, and for you, Kirsty, for running it, because I know you didn't feel very well. We did check out whether Pete would do it, but you said you'd be okay, and you have been. And finally, have a great birthday, I would say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.